How about Jen Hufford? Hannah Stofany.
I just scribed the deep meeting. My hand fell off.
Okay. How about Gary Mantiam?
Describe. I haven't done this in a long time.
Please assess
We-
how I managed this yesterday for another session while my son went wild on candy. So there are ways we can manage. Can someone please volunteer?
Was it a yes or a no, Gary?
But can I just take my notes on my own pad and send them, or do I need to use a tool? I'm asking.
You click on the Meet Echo link in the meeting materials, and it'll bring up a window, or you can
Got
click
it. Okay.
on it. Yeah.
Will do. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. Okay. Thanks to both our scribes, Eric and Gary. So just a reminder that this session is being recorded. In terms of reminders for participation, by participating in the IETF, you agree to follow the IETF processes and policies. If you're aware that any IETF contribution is covered by patents or patent applications that are owned or controlled by you or your sponsor, you must disclose that fact or not participate in the discussion. As a participant or an attendee to any IETF activity, you acknowledge that written audio, video, and photographic records of meetings may be made public. Personal information that you provide to IETF will be handled in accordance with the IETF privacy statement. As a participant or attendee, you agree to work respectfully with other participants. In terms of online meeting tips, make sure your video is off unless you're chairing or presenting. Mute your microphone unless you're speaking. Use a headset is strongly recommended. Session blue sheet is automatically generated based on IETF data tracker logins. Chat rooms in MeetEcho are connected to the Jabber chat rooms on IETF data tracker. And there's more information here if you need it. Just a reminder of the code of conduct. IETF participants extend respect and courtesy to their colleagues at all times. Participants have impersonal discussion. Participants devise solutions for the global internet that meet the needs of diverse technical and operational environments. Participants are prepared to contribute to the ongoing work of the group. There's some information for access to the various meeting materials. It's also available on the MeetEcho video stream. And then the agenda for today is as you see here. So unless there are any comments or requests for change, I think we're ready to jump into the agenda. And so first up will be a discussion regarding overlap between attestation results, EAT and attestation sets. We've in the previous meeting we have had presentations on all of these drafts, so those who are attending the first session should be familiar with them. And this session is intended to have a conversation around what the overlap is, if any, and if there's any work that's potentially a blocker for any of these moving forward. So sorry about that. So let me switch to another window here.
It's the very first slide, if it's the one I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it's this one.
There.
Okay. So this, I think this is Eric's slide. So maybe Eric, if you wanted to just talk to it to kind of get things started, that would be great.
Sure. Over the last few weeks, the The authors of the EAT draft, draft Moriarty and draft Waite, have had a discussion in the background with the chairs trying to discuss overlaps between the documents. For those of you who remember IETF 111, there were requests by both the attestation results draft and the draft Moriarty attestation sets for working group adoption. But because there was the potential for overlaps in the scope of some of the documents, people wanted to do a review of what the actual overlaps were or were not. So we came up with this cut of a slide that talked about what overlaps seem to exist between the three drafts. And I do think that we came to a consensus. I'll look for Lawrence and Kathleen to go ahead and confirm. In terms of draft, the EAT draft, basically it is defining claims. And as you know, that it's been reviewed many times. And draft Moriarty, which is a listing of what sets of evidence that might be sent from an attester to a verifier. It seems like it would be good to reuse the definitions of claims from the EAT draft, and that seems to make sense. And it's possible that over time, draft Moriarty would also define new claims because there'd be a need to understand other types of evidence in ways that are not going to be vendor specific, and that we'd want to go ahead and perhaps add new claims to EAT over time. And it might not go into this version of the EAT draft, but it might go into future drafts. So it didn't seem like there was a lot of overlap in that direction. On the bottom side, oops, I think we have Dave in the queue. So any questions on that particular relationship, Dave?
My understanding from the EAT spec in section 1.3.2 of the EAT spec explicitly says that it's not just for things coming from the attester, it's also for claims that appear in the attestation results. It's a generic format, and the EAT spec currently covers both as far as its scope. I believe that's what the document says right now. So somebody can correct me if that's not the intent, but is what the document says right now. I'm just commenting as right now you classify it as coming from an attester, and it should say from an attester or a verifier.
This is Kathleen, just to provide a clarification. The main purpose is to be able to define what a set looks like, right? And that's absolutely not covered in the EAT draft. So just to make sure that that distinction is very clear, this is really to set up a registry so that people could define sets of local attestations that could be sent together as a single attestation remotely for scale. That's the main part. And if we need to reword some things, that's fine, but that's not covered and should not be covered in a document like the court EAT spec, because it's a small piece that is an extension and can be handled separately.
All right, so looking at the definition of the EAT draft as well as the attestation sets, to answer Dave's question, the text in the EAT draft does say that it's mostly coming from an attester. Then the later section says there are new attester claims that might come from a verifier. So I do think that that's captured in the top block, that there's stuff coming from the attester as well as from the verifier. And is there any pushback that there are the overlaps as asserted in the blue bubbles between those two drafts? All right, on the bottom relationship, as Kathleen just talked about, attestation sets is really defining types and sets of evidence in different sets. And then that doesn't seem to have an overlap with what the generated attestation results would be from the verifier. So it looks like there's not an overlap between attestation sets, which is what's being attested, and the attestation results in terms of the trustworthiness claims that are coming about the overall posture of an attester as evaluated by a verifier. So the assertion on the bottom angle here, the bottom two, without talking any relationship with EAT, is that there's no obvious overlap in those two drafts. And I see Lawrence in queue. Lawrence, do you have any comments on the bottom angle or the angle that we talked about before between EAT and attestation sets?
Yes. Just quickly, the Voight attestation results discusses identity claims like hardware identity. It doesn't call them claims. It just discusses that there's something that would be a part of attestation results, and EAT does define claims for those things.
Okay, we're not yet talking about that angle yet between the top and the one on the left. We'll get to that one next.
Okay, sorry if I'm off there.
Any comments on attestation results to the attestation results Voight draft and the Moriarty draft? Is there any disagreement that there's no overlap there? All right, so the last discussion is the one that Lawrence just pointed out, is that there is a draft and claims in the EAT draft on identity, and the draft Voight attestation results has types of identity. That's a part of the discussion that is needed for the use of the attestation results in secure interaction models. So there are definitely claims of identity in EAT, and there's categories of identity types that are non-normative claims in draft Voight. So in the left draft Voight relationship to draft RATS EAT, there are new claims that could be taken into EAT on the attestation results, and there are identity types in EAT that could be used in embodiments of the draft attestation results that would be used for secure interaction models. And that's why on the very left-hand side, there's something that says subsequent draft embodiments could use EAT encoding for things like specific identity claims of the types that are identified in attestation results. So Hank, you're in queue. Hank, can't hear you.
Oh yeah, sorry. No, when I change the audio, sometimes it skips here on my side. Sorry. Yeah, this is Hank. I think it's a little bit like with the attestation sets. So yes, I think that when we arrive at a maturity level that we can assess that actually we can use identity claims from EAT if they're applicable. And that's, I think, the reason why each is there. So we can reuse generic claims that are relatively universal. And if we have to create additional claims, these can be in addition to EATs later, so to speak. They don't have to be in the EAT core document, I think. If we arrive at a conclusion that there's something that is definitely disjoint, and still about identity, I think it's a no-brainer to add either in this document or and in the separate document next to the information model that we actually do here, some claim definitions. So they're not very far apart, and I think that will be complementary and not conflicting. We just have to make sure that we reuse everything in each that can be reused in order not to do redundant things. That would be bad.
All right, so I think that's a good point. There's lots of documents and lots of identities out there. Certainly, there are other drafts like draft Chen RATS TE identification, which also uses identities. So there will be a lot of identities that can be attested, and there are some in EAT, there'll be some in many other drafts. Not all identities are going to come from a single place. They'll come from many places. All right, so I think that's what was requested for the kickoff of the session, is what the kinds of overlaps would be. It doesn't look like there's anything normative that I see that would be a conflict in the existing drafts. I'll let the others jump in and assert their own thoughts on this. Anybody else who wants to jump in? I think the answer from the last IETF, though, is no. It doesn't feel like there are major overlaps in normative claims between these drafts at this point, or the purposes of the drafts.
Thanks, Eric. So if that's I guess the question is to the group, are the various concerns that some have had about overlap addressed by this conversation? Are there other aspects that we need to discuss?
Yeah, this is Gary here. I had a question directly to Eric. I'm going to take a break from my notes and then I'll transcribe my question. As a EAT co-editor, there is a pull request outstanding on attestation results that Lawrence has created. I am taking your last statement to mean that there is no conflict between that pull request and your draft as written. Is that correct?
Currently, that I would agree with that. There is what I've seen with the software result and the stuff that has gone into the draft recently. We have existing claims where there is a conclusion about that claim made as part of software result. And having supplementary verifier approval of information is a very different thing than what draft void is doing, which is evaluating the overall trustworthiness of a device itself. So it's very independent claims. Yes.
Just as a follow-up, so you would have no objection to us incorporating a pull request, and bringing that particular claim into EAT.
I think that's an independent question. I don't know if I would want to see that. I don't have any problem with it, the software result, but I think it's an independent question on whether people want the details of the verifier results against each claim. So if you're saying that I have no problem from a scope overlap, I have no real experience in my use of verifiers to want that level of detail in a relying party. Personally, I think relying parties should be simply relying on very high-level conclusions from a verifier. So I wouldn't want to verify a relying party that is really looking at a lot of detail from another device. So I guess you're getting into a philosophical question, and the philosophical question to me is, I want my relying parties to be very simple and dumb, but if EAT finds a use for having a lot of details about individual claims and people want to use that, then sure, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Eric goes on the queue.
Eric, can I ask, do you think there's a place where the relationship between these documents should be permanently recorded so that the next person who says, how do these pieces fit together, has somewhere to go to look?
That's a good question. I do think that what we don't have as a working group right now is a description of what the objects are and how they relate. And I think the question really is, as we define objects, how do we understand the schema dependencies between different objects? And that is an open question that I don't think we've addressed as a working group, to say what are the ways these particular claims interrelate. And that's a very hard problem if we want to go ahead and try to pick that up. I do think that's a very large conversation to say how how do we make sure that our information models have reasonable ties between them? And that's how I'd reframe that question.
Okay, Adam's on the queue, and then I think we need to lock the queue.
I'll just tail off of Guy's comment on a document to say how all these pieces fit together, but also possibly, I think it's more of a support document of being justifications for why it ended up this way in a way. Because I know some of it might be on the mailing list, but some of it was through discussion and learning over time. Yeah, this doesn't really make sense to put these two pieces together and why they're separated now. So 5 years from now, when someone comes back, why didn't these two pieces go together? We have a justification. Just food for thought.
Can't hear you, Lawrence, if you're speaking.
Oh, yeah. I had a slide I sent you. I guess that's not in the deck for presentation.
Yeah, I
I
don't
sent you
think
a slide on attestation results that I wanted to present. Okay, I'm going to just say what it was in the slide then. I think this is actually really important. So I don't see attestation results as just one thing. There's not going to be one attestation results draft. There are many forms of attestation results. Attestation results, in my view, could be as simple as a Boolean yes or no, or maybe a yes/no error code. Very, very, very simple. Attestation results could be like Eric's draft, a particular conception of a vector of 8 values. Attestation results could be a very large pile of claims that are input to a machine learning based risk engine. Attestation results could include certification information about the device through a DLOA. I think attestation results could be in EAT format. So Eric's draft could be implemented in terms of EAT, or it could be implemented in terms of Yang or something else. Attestation results could be CBOR or JSON or SNMP or XML or all kinds of things like that. So I basically see the relationship between EAT and Eric's draft is kind of a, I mean, whether there's overlap or not, or competition or not, is really the wrong question. The point is like, it's the relationship is a little more subtle. You can use EAT as kind of a substrate or a basis for implementing Eric's draft. EAT can be the basis for attestation results in some other form. Maybe, I don't know, Geary defines an attestation results scheme. And Eric's draft could be also done in SNMP or Yang or something else, right? So I think that, I mean, one of my requests is it would be if Eric's draft is adopted, that it not be called attestation results, as if it were the sole solution for attestation results.
Okay, in the interest of time, I think we need to move on. Thank you, Gary. So next up is direct anonymous attestation. Hank.
Stepping up, trying to, yeah, and I'm audible, I hope. So this is a relatively small presentation about, again, direct anonymous attestation. Thank you for the time here. I think next to Dave, we are the only authors here in the room at the moment. Next slide, please. So I was a little bit confused on the list because I thought there was a working group adoption call, but it was a call for comments on the adoption. And then there was an actual adoption call, but I think these might have been conflated on the list a little bit. So I'm not sure if there is an actual difference on participants' side here, at least visible difference. So my first question would be, Where are we right now?
I'm looking at the mail list right now, Hank, and I'm trying to see if there were any comments to the, and my apologies if I didn't make that clear, because I did put out a call for adoption earlier this month,
Yeah.
closing the adoption today. All I saw was a comment question from Ned. So
the most comments were coming in when you were asking for comments and not for adoption. so that is why I found this a little bit.
Yeah. So perhaps the question we should be asking right now, Hank, you have addressed the comments that came in earlier, back in May,
Yes.
July, right?
Yeah.
Actually,
so we all did. So yeah, sorry.
Sorry, all the authors. Yes. Okay. So let's just ask the question now. Then, question is whether I need to put a poll for adoption. So does this working group believe this is important work and we should adopt it as a working group document? Lawrence, you're in the queue.
Sorry, I just forgot to get out of the queue.
Oh.
So I'll jump into the queue if there's no one there. But basically, my feedback is that given that there appears to there's still work that appears to be needed to support sort of the broad class of DAA algorithms, specifically the Intel's EPID, it seems that there's more work that's needed.
Yeah, and I think we should do this in the working group as a working group item. I think that is not a single author team's job to address because this is basically external input, and I think that's the working group process, right?
Yeah. So, okay. So I've just started a poll. So whether we need to work, whether the draft needs more work or not, it goes to the question of, do we believe the working group needs to be addressing direct anonymous attestations? And that being said, whether we can adopt this particular draft as the starting point. So this goes to the point of, does the working group believe we should be adopting this draft as a working group item? And then we can start posting issues against that. So please respond to the poll. We'll give it a few. I'll give it another minute or so.
Sorry, I'm just not raising my hand, but if nobody's on the queue, consider that raised hand. Can I ask a question to Hank on this topic?
Go for it, Gary.
Yeah. So how do we make sure that we're not in conflict with what the TCG is already defined by bringing such a draft into this working group?
We are working with the initial creators of that work in TCG. in collaboration, they're co-authors, and we are aligning this, of course, with the TCG attestation working group.
Let me put it another way. What is the purpose? We already have we already have specification being defined.
Yeah, but we do not map that to the REDS architecture, so that introduces new terminology, and we have no idea how to, for example, place the DAA issuer. Is that its own role? Where do we do this? How does it work with subscription? How do the others models map? That will be work that is to be done in this document here. It's very unclear how, because DAA is basically TPM work, And even with the DICE relationship, it is not clear with the RETS architecture how this should work. So we define roles and conceptual messages, and now we have to understand how would these roles and messages we have to modify it or extend it to support DAA. And that is already covered to a significant extent in the document today. But as Ned's comments show, there are still some parts of the solutions that we do not cover yet. And so I think documenting that and highlighting how this works in relationship with the architecture is fundamental to how it is implemented then as a, let's call it IETF interoperable solution.
Okay, I'm
So
going
we're-
to call time. Hold on a sec. Since I'm running the poll, I can't lock the queue. So Kathleen, if you can help me lock the queue, because we've got Roman and Dave, and we're running out of time, and there are 2 other things that we need to cover in the open mic. Thank you.
Yes, sure.
So if we can just move on. Roman, you're in the queue.
Thanks, Nancy. Just in the spirit of transparency, I want to double check that everyone appreciates how we're doing the consensus here. So we did a call for adoption on the mailing list. As far as I can tell, only 1 non-author supported it. And then what we're doing here now is confirming what we tried on the mailing list in the working group. And the poll is showing us that 15 folks do
15.
support adoption, right?
Right. Okay, Dave, you're in the queue.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Henk was saying in response to the question, what's the purpose? DAA as a concept is not specific to TCG, although it needs to be aligned. We also want to specify it in the IETF such that if you're using non-TCG related use cases, you are still capable of doing DAA, or at least explains how you can do DAA using EATS and the rest of the RISE architecture. So otherwise, completely agree with Henk's answer, but I think that this is important for the working group too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Lawrence just put in the chat that the DAA needs to cover more than just TCG, which we could do if we adopted this document. Okay, I'm going to give it.
Absolutely intense.
That was my point.
Yeah. So we're 7 minutes over. So, but we need to move to the next.
The other one.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So procedural question to Roman, since I had put out the call and the call was supposed to end by the end of today. Do I need to confirm this again, Roman, on the mail list, or can we call this to be consensus?
No, that's actually why I wanted to kind of speak up, because typically we do it the other way, which is we do it at the meeting and then we try to confirm it on the mailing list, and then you sum the 2 of those. And what we're doing here is the reverse, which is we started on the mailing list and we're summing it with what the meeting results are. So to me, it doesn't matter which one you start. It's a question of how you do them together. So we don't need to confirm this again on the mailing list because we've already tried that. And the other kind of key thing we might want to ask is, we didn't hear any objections raised, but now might be a good time before we decide to adopt it. Are there any objections we want to raise here on the mic to talk about?
So Ned, let's use 3 more minutes.
Okay.
So for those that have objections, if you want to speak now, because there is consensus. I'm not closing the poll yet. I'm going to count to 5. Oh, Guy, you're in the queue.
Yeah, hi, Nancy. This would be quite a bit of work, wouldn't it? Is it something that is viewed as important enough to the larger community to actually put work into it?
Well, speaking as the chair, this is why we're posing the question to the working group. So given that there is consensus, I believe this indicates that the working group believes it is important. If we're running low on time, so let's ask the question that Roman posed on the chat. if you can post on the chat, because we are running over, would you volunteer to work on it? Let me give that a few seconds. Crap. Okay. I'm going to do the poll since we're running over time. Okay, so first poll, would you be willing to work on the DAA draft? I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. Thanks, Thomas. Okay, so we do have a fair number of folks willing to work on the draft, so I'm going to end that. And then, Roman, can I just say, given that we have people there, should I do another poll for reviewers?
I think this is good enough. I mean, we're demonstrating it. We can add a couple more to say so in the chat. You know, it's just we're going to have to, you know, I'm sensitive, as mentioned in the working group, about having enough bandwidth to do all the work, all the documents at the same time. Maybe the follow-on discussion is about kind of sequencing and where where we should push the energy in the working group.
Okay, so the question on the chat has been, I'm going to end the session. What does it mean to not raise hand? It means that you're voting no. I like Dave's response. Okay, in the interest of time, we are adopting the DAA draft. So Hank and the authors, please convert it to an IETF draft. And you have, for those who raise their hand that are willing to work on it, please work with the current authors of that draft to improve it. All right, that said, let's move forward to the next agenda item, which was what? Oh, the open mic.
Concise reference, integrity manifest. That's what I have. So we still have one more presentation.
Oh, we do?
Before,
okay,
yep.
I was looking at the agenda.
So hi, this is Henk. I assume I will present on this because Thomas is blocked and Yogesh is not joining. And but Wei is here. Okay, okay, for Wei it's like super late. Okay, let me go into this here then. So hi, this is about reference integrity manifests, of course. So we have a mission statement here. We have to inform and verify about how a tester looks like. The initial cut we have here included is the OG reference values. I think the software results in the new claim in Lawrenson's EAT ID, for example, would cover that. When codes would cover that. We have an inclusion of verification key material, so to make sure that this evidence is viable. We have endorsed values, so these are the things that the attester really can't talk about itself. I don't know. A tester without a camera looking at itself can't tell you it's green. Yeah, so some things have to be endorsed from the outside. These are endorsed values. Other things are, for example, FIPS compliance, some other, for example, isolation qualities of a TE. These a tester can't really tell about itself because there, for example, are the hardware root of trust that kickstarts all of these trustworthiness claims. And so that's of course in here. There are future steps, but in the interest of time, I might not go through all of this. I think that's very important to highlight that extensibility is key here. And we have a vast, not vast maybe way of doing it, but we have a lot of places where we can add code points, like new claims that will be defined when there's more EAT claims in the future, and some things that we need here. So next slide, please. There is already applicability to this. So in TCG, this was taken up actually, and they have adopted the information model over there. That's interesting to the layered attestation, as these endorsements can tell you at which sequence, which environment is supposed to create evidence about a target environment. This is called layered attestation here in RATS, and that there has to be some verifier guidance, how that makes sense and how is that what might not make sense. So skipping, for example, the bootloader in this chain would probably fatal. But if the verifier doesn't know that, so that has to be informed about that. There's also a profile being created in parallel for CORIM that is specific to the RMPSA solution. So there's a PSA token ID in here in this working group, and the PSA endorsements is, so to speak, the other side of the coin. Again, as evidence endorsement. So this this profiling of the CORIM spec in parallel, and the use of it in TCG is our proof of concept and even running code. And then I can't really tell a lot about this yet, but there is a TPM-based evidence project in the enterprise space, but the relying party, so the responsible party there, did not agree in time that I can disclose anything about it. But stay tuned, that's not a secret, I just couldn't refer with them. So I think we show, as always, early on running code. Verizon of ARM side, of course, is a very prominent part there, but also the applicability to other domains we can show with other documents. TCG document actually I think is in balloting for public review and will be out in, I guess, next week, unfortunately. So we can't look at this today. So next slide, please. There is, yeah, this basically I spoiled that already, so this is not here yet. But if you want to have a look, there's of course not only the ID, we incubate most of the stuff in GitHub, and especially the CDDL is reused for different IDs yet. So the one CDDL is used in CORIM and for the profiling of CORIM in the PSA endorsement. So there is a synergy across multiple documents already, and that is working out quite well, and the quality increased significantly due to that continuous testing. Next slide, please. So yeah, these are all the pointers. So CORIM is basically the bundle. I think I said that already. COMID is the hardware hierarchy equivalent to COSWID. COSWID is file system specific, files, hash versions, like the software results from each claim here. These are typically in file systems. It was hard to squeeze firmware in hardware components into the file system concept. So that made COMID happen. It's a concise module identifier, which is basically the complement here. So firmware that is not located in the file system, but on hardware, like the firmware, that's why it's called that way, is for example, referenced here. And we have, of course, support for COSWID, as I just highlighted. There's also a command line tool. Thank you. I think Thomas had the lead on that, that you can create CORIMs, COMIDs, and COSWIDs respectively on the user command line at home on your system when you have the right tool chain. I think that's really useful to get early hands on. Again, I'm rushing a little bit through this because we lost a little bit of time here. We want to have an open mic still in the end. So next slide, please. There is the question of does this work fit this working group? And so we read the charter extensively. We stared at it hard. And so I'm not sure if I have to run through all the text here, but the bolded text is our phrasings from the charter. And so, of course, describing an attester to a verifier is standardizing formats about assertions about the systems components of an attester. It's directly associated with evidence because you need it in corresponding to evidence. It is, of course, as a requirement in the architectures, in the REDS charter, protected, and as this would be the evidence. And it is intended to be consumed by verifiers, which is a role that is covered in the architecture. which is and curiously is not covered in the charter. So that is something that I kind of forgot, to be honest. I thought that the verifier was named explicitly in the charter. It is not. But as we focus on evidence that is sent to the verifier, I think it's just appropriate to do the complement also, that is the endorsement and the reference values. So basically, having said that, all the really important things here that is fueling definitions into this work are the supply chain stakeholders. So everybody who's building TEEs or components for trustworthiness or some software components that are then in the end testing environments, for example, running in TEs again, that these are authors on this document, and to some extent, again, I highlighted this, we have already agreement with TCG because they adopted the terminology we introduced here, specifying identifying systems and the key material that we need for that. So that part of the goals of the charter seems to us, and this is just our author's opinion here, to be in line with the charter. The next slide, please. There are also deliverables defined, and I think it's rather simple to say that we cover deliverable 2, 3, and 4. 3 might be arguable because you would have to check the use cases. I just referenced them by number here, but I think for all these use cases, you require a certain supply chain entity information about the system components. And yeah, so maybe for the interest of time, I'm not restating what's in the charter here right now. This is just our let's call it analysis of does this work fit into the current charter's scope, or would we have to recharter for this? And our assumption is, well, this fits more than we even expected for it to fit. But again, of course, this is not our decision. This is just our assessment. So that's where we are leaving at. That is the next slide. Can we do a working group call for adoption? Actually, you can see the ongoing work on GitHub, how the issues are handled. Everything is very transparently and open there. The document is in a fairly stable state between multiple vendors that have quite not always the same requirements. Let's call it that, and they all seem to be happy with the current state right now, so that we are comfortable with a call for adoption. There have been thrice weekly design meetings. We hope to dial that down a little bit when this becomes a working group item. But again, we are used to this for like a year now. So that is happening. And yeah, so we are comfortable with doing that. The charter seems to allow for it. And so now I would place that question first to this to the attendants in this session of the group here, and then maybe to the list. But maybe some early feedback here would be nice.
So admittedly, I don't know, I haven't been looking at this part of the GitHub, Hank. So my first question was to ask who's actually reviewed it, but I'm also looking at the open mic time. And to Roman's point, the prioritization and importance of this, given all of the other drafts that we need to progress, right? Okay, so we had people on the queue and then they fell off the queue. Guy, I'm going to let this go for 2 more minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
And if we run out of time, I might put it on the list. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, thank you. Hank, could you help me understand the difference between co-RIM and co-SWID for doing software attestation? I mean, co-SWID is what we've been saying is the reference integrity format for RATs, right?
I will tell you what hardware components are there, how your rules of trust look like. That's not software. And the co-RIM is the bundle. Co-RIM is the manifest. So it's a bundle of all the items that compose in a hierarchy, or maybe even worse things than your composite devices. They can be rather complex, but IoT devices, luckily so not. You need at least a commit that tells you this is my device and its firmware. As soon as a UEFI or a file system kicks in, you need a co-SWID to understand if its layout is fine. And so I think that's the relationship. The co-RIM is the umbrella manifest, where some and it's called actually the creator. It can be an OEM. An OEM, for example, could relabel other hardware, so opaque identifiers are important, as we already established, for example, in what was it, in TEEP just now. And so so yeah, that's a co-RIM part, and commit again is the hardware hierarchy, including its firmware and applicability of environment identification. And then in this environment there are very often file systems, and these file systems are then kind of covered by co-SWID. Does that in a nutshell answer your question? Guy? Maybe not.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Hank, I really need the 10 minutes, so
Yeah, sure.
let's put
So we
this
can do the
question-
call on the list.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I realized we had open mic, but we had some items left. Eric, is it quick?
I was trying to get an open mic, so if we want to wait, I'll wait for that.
Oh, you're jumping the queue. We have two open items that we started on whenever it was that we met on Monday. One was we're trying to assess readiness of the EAT draft for working group last call. There was discussion about including the claims needed to satisfy TEEP. I can report, but then Dave, I'd like you to also elaborate. We, the TEEP working group actually met this morning, and we discussed the claims that TEEP needed to assess, and I'll just put the broader one, whether they were unique to TEEP or not. And I believe that in one of the polls, the answer was that it was not. But however, TEEP would like to see it done in the EAT draft, but the EAT draft should consider for, and now I can't remember, having it be for vendor extensibility. That's all I remember. Dave, help me out here.
Sure. So I put this on the list, so you should have it all in your mailboxes, because I put it in the break because TEEP met right before RATS. And so I put the conclusions, and thank you to all of the RATS people who are actually there in the TEEP meeting, but not all of you were, and in particular, Gary and Lawrence were not. And so I tried to represent the views that were placed on the list in that meeting. And so the takeaway from TEEP is that TEEP believes that the concept of a class identifier is not TEEP specific. And the recommendation is specifically that the EAT spec would define a claim, but leave the definition of the values of the claim to profiles and to vendors. In other words, the TEEP profile would be responsible for specifying specific values of that claim that would be useful for TEEP and what the meanings of those values are. And also to that the EAT would be able to specify how a vendor gets a value. In other words, there's a way for profiles to get values and a way for vendors to get values. And so that is the outcome. Nancy did polls, and there was pretty strong consensus on that. And the only other requirement that was in a separate poll was are the values opaque or structured? And I would say there was a fairly strong consensus across all of the community, all of the RATS suit and TEEP members who are present. There were 0 against of saying that it should be opaque. In other words, that there is no structure. And so there were some that had argued that it would be nice if the format was something like a UUIT, just because that helps to ensure opaqueness, but that was a decision left up to RATS. So again, opaque please, and the request to define a claim, but leave the definition of the values and the semantics of the values to profiles, and it would be fine if RAT says, well, okay, here's a claim, and the profile, in order to have values, here's the requirements for that profile to define a value and what you have to do for it. And so that's kind of my summary of what I heard as the outcome of the polls. So thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Lawrence, you're in the queue.
Yeah, so there were comments on GitHub from Thomas and Jeremy about this that I don't think line up with other discussion here. So I don't think there is consensus on this particular claim. So I think, but that said, in terms of working group last call, this is a relatively minor issue. I mean, I think the bigger issues in terms of working group last call is things we discussed, were about the CDDL for GWT and CWT and whether we're really going to do both JSON and CBOR. So
Okay,
on
so
this particular issue, I'd like the design discussion for class to go to the mailing list and maybe be separate from working group last call.
Okay. Well said, Lawrence. So that said, I'm starting a poll to see if the group believes the EAT draft is ready for working group last call. And I believe, Lawrence, you did update the draft. So I'm speaking to the latest.
We haven't pushed out a -12 yet, but we're ready to.
Okay.
So Nancy, your question is draft 11 ready for last call, correct? That's the correct meaning of the question? So everybody's answering the same question.
Yeah, I guess we should put it on draft 11, given that draft 12 isn't out yet.
But then the answer is clearly no, because the draft 12 is already in the pipeline.
Draft 12 is draft 12 on things such as a class claim is awaiting consensus. We're not ready to push that out. We will push out a draft 12 with last call comment resolution as well. We don't need to push it out right now. Oh. I think it's
So remember, we can always pull a second working group last call, right? So we know that we need to, yes,
yeah.
Hannes, it's a pre-last call, but we need to make sure that the other things that we've been discussing in the past are maturing enough. And I know that the group should take note that we need to solidify the claims. So that said, I'm going to give it a few more seconds. I'm going to count to 5. 1, 2. Okay, so it looks like we have consensus for the minute takers. Please note, since my laptop's still not well, as an action item, the chairs will do a first working group last call. All right. So 1 down. The second one, and Roman, I'll need your help here since I keep not clarifying my notes too well. The second one was there's been questions about the status of the architecture draft. We went through a working group last call. I want to say we started that last year. We had a whole round of comments. They were addressed. I guess we had a pre, and then we had another sort of more official last call earlier this year, in which most of the issues were addressed. We had the process of going through the shepherding. As part of the shepherding, there was some IPR issues that came up. And so I tried to put the discussion of just the IPR on the mail list to ensure that there was consensus that we could move forward, given that there were 2 IPR claims put out. So as far as I believe, if I can speak on behalf of the chairs, Kathleen, you can speak up as well. And Roman, you can help me here too. we should be ready to put this out to IESG for publication. If we can get the consensus from the working group that we're fine with the current IPRs that have been posted, that you're fine moving the drafts over to publication.
Yes, so I agree. And I think just making sure we have a time on providing feedback on the IPR statement was all that was needed. And so typically we
Yes.
do 2 weeks for that type of call, right? So, or for any type of call on a list. So if we could just mark it as 2 weeks from there, and then as Shepherd, I will work with Nancy because, you know, IPR is a little more complex, but so I won't work as Shepherd in a box on that part, and we'll come to agreement on the feelings of the working group, and then we'll progress it to the next step, which is pushing it to the IESG, and then for working group last call, and then the area reviews can kick off at that point. But they'll want to know what the working group thinks on IPR, so we really can't jump the gun on that. Thank you, Nancy.
Yep. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Roman, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I mean, you and Kathleen laid it out exactly right. I mean, I would just reiterate to the working group, we're through the technical reviews inside the working group. We just tripped over this IPR issue. And so now is the time that the working group should raise objection or provide concurrence that despite this new information related to the IPR, you are still interested in the document proceeding forward, or wait, this is completely new information and this changes your perspective on whether we should be proceeding. And depending on how much, how much harmony there is on that kind of decision, that's perhaps as simple as documenting it and putting in the Shepherd write-up, as Kathleen kind of indicated. Or if we have less kind of convergence on the way ahead, it's going to be a longer conversation. So this could be as short as advancing the document to me by early December, late November, or it could be a longer conversation. Let's just sort this out in the next kind of week, and I believe with the 2-week call, we're going to close it next at the end of next week.
Yep. That's correct.
Perfect. Thanks.
Great. Okay. With that said, I'm good at running us over for a minute. So I'm just going to close by saying we did run out of time. We can put on the mail list a call for adoption for the other attestation results and attestation sets. So that one we can put on the mail list. And I think with that, we can close the meeting. Thank you, everyone. And for anything else that you want to take up, let's continue that on the mail list as well. Thank you, everyone.
A big thanks to you, Nancy, handling most of this because of the other chairs having conflicts. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
All right. Okay, I think we're done. Happy Friday. Oh, yes, go ahead and stop the session. I was just trying to capture all the notes. But I'm done.